It's been a very exciting week of announcements from the Daggerheart team at Gen Con this weekend, but just before that, we also saw a whole new mechanic added to the Daggerheart Void called transformations. Currently, there are 6 transformations presented that fundamentally shift and alter the way your character works in a very significant way. Each is supposed to offer some varying degree of bane and boon. That is to say that you obtain a benefit for being under the effect of a transformation. However, there is also a drawback which varies depending on which transformation you have. So in this video, I wanted to go over each of the new transformations and discuss how they work in the game. Thank you all so much for the support over the last few months as I've been branching out into Daggerheart content. I've been having so much fun with it, and it seems like you are too. So if you'd like to help me out, subscribing to the channel and clicking the like button while you're there helps out way more than you realize. Thank you so much. Transformations in Daggerheart, as you'd probably expect, take the form of a card, and they represent the augmentations and changes to your character. They are an optional feature for the game and can be offered during character creation or given as a result of some event that takes place during an adventure. The mechanic itself is specifically described as requiring the player to fully buy into the concept of not just the transformation itself, but also the exchange of taking on the burden to obtain the benefit. This makes sense as it does fundamentally alter your character, so it is important to have player buy-in before committing to something like this in your game. It's also worth noting that a player can only have one transformation at a time, and it does not count against the number of domain cards in their loadout. Transformations can also offer a very dynamic way to change and alter a campaign in very defined ways. Perhaps it completely changes the story arc of a character, or maybe it even enhances and reinforces it. The point is that it can enable all sorts of different quests and rewards and different things that perhaps were a little bit more out of reach prior to their existence. Alright, with the basic rules established, let's dive into the transformations themselves. First up is the vampire, and I'll be fully transparent here. The first time I read this one, I didn't quite get it, and maybe some of you are like me, so we'll go over how it all works. So like all the transformations, vampire gives us 2 features. First is fangs. To use our fangs, we need to make a strength roll to bite a target within melee range, which deals a d8 physical damage using our proficiency. It's not a bad attack, it scales with proficiency, which is very nice. The big downside is that it is tied specifically to strength, which may be inconvenient for some classes. Fangs on its own is not particularly interesting though. What is interesting is that you almost need to use it because of the feed feature. The way feed works is that when we make a successful attack with our fangs, we can mark a stress to feed. When we do that, we place a number of tokens on our vampire card equal to the number of hit points we require the target to mark when we hit them, and we can have up to a maximum of 5 tokens on the card. When you take a long rest, you remove a token, and if there's none left to remove, all action and reaction rolls are then made with disadvantage. That can be pretty punishing, so you might be asking what exactly the tokens do for us, and the answer is slightly confusing. Before we make any action that requires a roll, we can opt to spend one of our tokens to increase the size of our fear die to a d20. This sounds strange. Why would we ever want to do that? That's the interesting part, and it reminds me of the Witch's Charm feature that we discussed in the new classes video. Increasing the size of our fear die to a d20 obviously increases the probability of us rolling with fear, which admittedly is less than ideal. However, it does simultaneously increase the probability of us succeeding on the roll. So you get to weigh this interesting decision now about how important a roll is to make and whether it's worth the increased chance at turning it into a roll with fear. The other cool thing with this is that if you are playing a class like the Warlock or the aforementioned Witch that has access to the Dread domain, there are Dread cards that benefit when you roll with fear, which makes this a very cool combo for those classes. It creates a lot of potentially exciting and impactful decision making, which is something that I am always a big fan of. The vampire transformation really conveys that sense of urgency and that need to feed that vampires have. If you don't, you're going to be rolling everything with disadvantage, but when you do, it also represents this pull toward darkness in the form of fear. I think this whole concept is brilliantly designed, which is a whole lot more than I can say for some of the other transformations. Moving on, our next transformation is the Werewolf. This one is unique in that while most of the others are permanent transformations, this one isn't, and the player actually has some agency in when the transformation occurs, though it is still tied to being attacked. It speaks to the flavor of lycanthropy, and it's pretty damn cool. Our first feature is wolf form. The way this works is that when we mark 1 or more hit points, we can also opt to spend a stress. If we do, we enter our wolf form, and we then get a d10 that we can add to all attack and damage rolls. This is a huge boon. The downside is that whenever we would gain a hope, we instead are required to mark a stress. This feature enables a very strong buff, but one that is also very temporary and can leave you quite vulnerable. The second werewolf feature, Frenzy, describes how the transformation ends and what happens. When we mark our final stress while in wolf form, we enter a frenzy. To do so, we roll an amount of d20s equal to our tier of play and deal that much physical damage to all creatures within very close range, and then we drop out of our wolf form. A few things to note here. It does hit all creatures, which means that it can impact allies. While obviously not great, it does feel very flavorful and connected to being a werewolf that even your allies don't want to be so close to you. The second thing to note is that, as I mentioned earlier, it leaves you quite vulnerable. You're now maxed out on stress. As a reminder, if a creature requires you to mark a stress while you're maxed out on it, you instead have to mark a hit point, so this leaves you in quite a dangerous spot. Now, there are a number of ways from domain cards and other class features to clear stress, so hopefully you have one of those. The final thing to note is related to that, and it does not say anything about not being able to clear stress while you are in your wolf form. This suggests that you or your allies can continue to help manage your stress to keep you in the form for longer and dealing your increased damage. I think the werewolf is super cool. It feels very thematically linked to the fiction and has some impactful and dynamic mechanics. The next transformation to look at is the Reanimated, and this is one where I am a bit confused. I know these aren't all supposed to be buffs and some are supposed to confer some negative features, but this one's rough. Our first feature, if you can call it that, is Stitch Up. With this, we can no longer heal through any means other than as part of a downtime activity or through the Risk It All death move. That's it. No class features, subclass features, domain cards, nothing else will heal us anymore. And on top of that, we can only clear hit points through a downtime activity if we have access to a recently deceased creature. So I guess your party's going to be looking around some bodies after each fight now. Our second feature is Corpse. This one makes it so that when we take the Risk It All death move and we fail, we can permanently mark one hit point to succeed instead. This is a bit odd since, you could just opt to use Avoid Death instead. Now I know we had a whole discussion about that in a previous video, but it still seems strange. I would have expected them to restrict our death move option to just being Risk It All, but for some reason they opted to not do that, even though they do restrict death moves in another transformation that we'll talk about soon. Reanimated is weird. You don't really want this one because it does nothing good for you unless you happen to die. That said, a big part of the discussion around death moves has been consequences, so I will say that something like this could be a consequence for someone using the Avoid Death move during an adventure. Perhaps they come back reanimated and need to complete some other quest or deed before reclaiming their own body. It's a strange one, but it does create some potentially interesting scenarios and consequences. Next up is Shapeshifter. Our first feature here is Change Shape, which allows us, during a long rest, to spend one of our downtime moves to swap our current ancestry with another one, and we get to describe how our physical appearance changes. This has the potential to be incredibly powerful. Many of the ancestries in the game offer some very powerful features that are great all the time, but there's also some that are fairly situational. This allows you, almost on a whim, to be able to decide what the right feature for the day is, and that flexibility is worth a lot. The flip side of this incredible power is our second feature, Only Skin Deep. This one essentially says that when we do transform, we only gain the benefit of one of our ancestry's features, not both. So with the boon of incredible flexibility, you get the sacrifice of having one feature instead of two. This, in many cases, is still probably worth it. If you needed some extra recovery during a rest, the Clank's Efficient or the Elf Celestial Trance are great options. If you needed some damage reduction, either the Dwarf's Thick Skin or Increased Fortitude are also great. Galapa Shell can boost armor, or Giant's Reach can increase versatility with weapons. These are just some of the options available, and being able to swap any of these out on a long rest, I think is absolutely worth sacrificing one of your ancestry features. The way you obtain this transformation could also be pretty fun, whether it came from a curse or from taking damage from some mystical fey creature or anything of that nature. There's a lot to like about the Shapeshifter transformation. Next up is the Ghost, and I'll be honest, like the Reanimated, it's a bit weird. Our first feature is Spirit Form. With this, we can spend a stress to shift between being corporeal and incorporeal. While we're in our spirit form, we can move through solid objects and we are immune to physical damage. However, we now take double magic damage. Additionally, we can spend 2 hope to attack physically or interact with the material world. This is strange since your form is very defensive, but it also doesn't let us do very much, at least not without significant cost. Spending 2 hope anytime you want to attack or interact with the world can get pretty expensive pretty quickly. I feel like you'll often be stuck doing a whole lot of nothing as a ghost, which feels a bit unfortunate. though it can be a potentially great defensive option if you know you aren't going to be facing any magic damage. The second feature, Ephemeral, is where things get really weird though. With this, you cross out a hit point slot when you get the card, and whenever you increase your tier of play. So depending on when you get this, it'll be at level 2, 5, and 8. However, when you mark your last hit point, you must choose the Blaze of Glory death move. I want to underscore something here because I misunderstood it the first time I read it. You have to use the Blaze of Glory whenever you mark your final hit point, not just when you cross it out because of the Ephemeral feature. This gives a certain degree of inevitability to the character. It's almost like you're fighting a losing battle, slowly whittling down hit points over time before you're eventually forced to cross through the Veil of Death. Ghost is better than Reanimated in the sense that at least there is a perk in the form of immunity to physical damage, but this is still not a great one to have. Between the two, I think Reanimated, while more punishing, is also more interesting and probably serves as a better consequence. And finally, our last transformation is Demigod. Our first feature is Ichor of the Gods, which lets our advantage die always be a d10 instead of a d6. This is obviously very good, but just how good it is pretty much entirely contingent on how consistently you can have advantage on your rolls. Now, there are a number of domain cards that offer ways to gain advantage and even ancestry features too, and plenty of community cards also offer advantage on certain types of checks as well. So there's no shortage of opportunity, it'll just be more of a question of the frequency with which you can make it work, because the downside here is pretty steep. The downside here does come from our second feature, Weight of Divinity. This makes it so that whenever we fail a roll with fear, we must mark a stress or give the GM an additional fear token. This can turn an already bad situation into a potentially debilitating one. I'm overall a bit conflicted on Demigod. My gut says that the benefit does not justify the burden here, but I'm curious to hear what you all think. Obviously, a failure with fear is only one of the possible outcomes and becomes less likely when rolling a d10 for advantage, but I'm still not sure. So those are the new transformations to Daggerheart. It's always very exciting to see a new mechanic being added to a game to keep things fresh and fun. Thank you so much to all of my patrons, you guys rock. Check out some of my other Daggerheart videos, but otherwise, take care.